Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about something I call microprocessing, which is adding effects to a sound and then using very minimal settings so that the sound is just slightly affected, and then using a lot of those kind of effects, maybe it's a chorus or a flanger or whatever. Before I want to dive into that though, I have a little bit of news on my new EP coming out soon. The release date will be the 13th. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the YouTube videos version of the song like every day or every 2 days, as to not spam your subscription box too much. But all other platforms like SoundCloud, Spotify, those kind of platforms, the actual streaming platforms for music, will have the whole EP uploaded as soon as it's released. So if you're interested in that, go follow me on either Spotify or SoundCloud or Apple Music or any other streaming service that I'm on. There are links in the description for that, so if you're interested in that, please go follow me there. But without further ado, let's get into the actual tutorial for today. Alright, so here we have a sequence that I've been working on. I've shown this project off on stream, and I've made a lot of this project on stream as well. So you might be familiar with it. If you're not, I'll quickly play just a little part of the drop that we have here. It sounds like this. So that's what we have, and we'll be looking at how this was made. I'm going to skip over most of the sound design, the actual patches. I'll quickly just open it up and kind of show you what's going on, but I'm not going to go into depth on how exactly things work. So this is a basic FM patch. This is set up with the key tracking disabled. This trick I've also shown up before. So we're using velocity and the note to do our actual modulation. And we have another version of that over here as well. I think this one is pretty similar in terms of the actual starting sound. It's just using the SSQ version. As you can see, again, we're using node data and pitch tracking disabled to actually modulate things. So this is the SSQ carrier style synth. We have some basic saw waves here. I don't even have to open the patches, just detuned saw waves coming out of that. We have some formant plugs or formant sounds, so saw wave through formant filter with a phaser on it. The phaser is fairly important for the sound, but other than that, it's nothing very special. Then we have another patch here, which is doing just a FM plug. Again, we're using note values here, but we're not actually changing those. We're constantly playing the same note, so we didn't have to disable the pitch tracking. We are using velocity for some of the stuff though. And finally here we have just a preset, which is adding a squelch from Futurephonic. So that's the main sound design. What I mainly want to focus on is what's happening in the effect change. So we'll go over the basic concept of what I'm actually doing and how I go about this with the first one. So I'll quickly turn off the effects that I would consider to be like microprocessing. So that's this one and these two. For the rest, we have a simple EQ here, scooping out some of that mid-range to make space for our bassline's mid-range. And then we have a stereo processor, a compressor, and a filter doing some creative filtering here when it comes in. And then finally our delay. Also of note here is that we're sidechaining the entire sequence altogether. So there is an actual sidechain on it. It's not very extreme, as you can see, fairly low settings. But this is what that sounds. That main sound of the sequence sounds like without the microprocessing on it. So as you can hear, it sounds fairly similar to what we heard in the context of the full track. But if I turn it on now, all these four effects, you can hear a difference in the sound. So you can hear that it has a little bit more of a unique character, a unique sound. It's also a little bit brighter as a result of the distortion. But the character mainly comes from the chorus and the flanger. because it's editing the harmonic context with the type of time-based effects that it's using. You get a variation in the spectrum. So that's adding the character mostly, and then we have the saturation and this final enhancing preset, which I'm slightly modified as well. That's doing the brightness of it. So this is useful because this is not something you can just do in sound design itself. There's no patch, no single patch that can make this exact same sound. These little processes really help a sound stand out. And it's something that I've been neglecting a little bit, and I haven't been doing it as much. But in this track, I've really started to experiment with it. And it's really paid off because I really like this track. I do have to say this one is not on the EP. So this one will be released later, hopefully. But it is a cool sound nonetheless. So basically, let's go over some of the settings. For example, this chorus, as you can see, we have very short timing settings here. And we also have no modulation. As you can see, the amount is set to 0, so no modulation. And then a very low dry wet of 25%. Again here, we have very minimal settings. As you can see, no feedback, no modulation amount here, and a very small dry wet. So they're not really adding to it. So there isn't any motion being added because the modulation is turned off. Normally, if you're using a flanger or a chorus, you want to modulate it because that kind of brings in the swinging motion that you often hear in these kind of effects. But we've deliberately turned it off. So it's static and it's just adding a tone to it rather than that modulation, that wavy feeling that you sometimes get from these effects. So yeah, again, the basic principle is to add these effects and just have minimal settings, either chorus, flanger, but there are some other effects that can do it as well, which we'll go over in a bit. For the distortion and the saturation and the enhancement, this is more to kind of glue the sound together. It's kind of smashes the sound, and it's obviously it makes it louder as well, so you have to compensate for that. But with very low dry wet settings, especially on this enhanced one, which is only at 11%, as you can see, it is barely noticeable that the volume turns up, so we can afford not to play with the output. But nonetheless, it will still add that little bit of gluing effect that you get from distorting something or using an overdrive. So it's mostly to glue the sound together and to kind of polish the sound and finish the sound, which is something I've been lacking in my productions. So this is a really nice way to do that. On the other one here, again, you can see the main idea. There's a little bit fewer effects. We still have the chorus and the saturator here. And we also have this one, which is a sample reduction. So I've talked about this stuff here. As you can see, these settings are a little bit more aggressive. Because I had fewer effects, I decided to turn up the actual effects that these things gave. So as you can see, we are actually fully saturating this a little bit harder. So let's talk about this thing going on here, this combination. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically remaking the high end. I wasn't really happy with the high end of this thing. If we turn it off, we can listen to it. You'll have to ignore the fact that we're now also having sub. But if we turn it on with this one as well, you can hear we have a much nicer high end. So what we're doing is we're basically pushing away the old high end a little bit with this EQ, and then mixing in this the downsampling of this Redux effect here. And as you can see, it's very light downsampling. Usually with downsampling, it's really easy to become very aggressive. If I turn this down, it will really destroy, or turn it up, it will really destroy the sound and it's not recognizable anymore. So it's an effect that you want to use as a micro effect because you want to just use it a little bit. A good way to do that is set it to soft mode. But for this particular track, the number 4 worked really well. So now let's go over to this one and I'll show you some more stuff that I'm doing. Here I'm doing something with resonators. And resonators is again one of those effects that's not very commonly used in a lot of tracks. There's not really a sound design process that you specifically require resonators to get the exact sound, and it's a very popular effect. It's a little bit of an underused effect, but nonetheless it can add a lot of cool stuff to a sound and make it a little bit more unique. So if I turn it off, you can hear what the original sounds like without the resonators. As you can hear, it just very lightly changes the tone of it. And as you can see, we have the decay all the way down so that it's actually not bringing out. And again, we have a very low dry wet, and these settings just worked for it. The way I set these up, especially for stuff like resonators, is I start off with the dry wet at 100% and with the decay also very high, and I tune these things. These need tuning. For this, the octave just worked fine. But this is what you get. This would be the tone that we're adding to the actual sound. So then we can turn the decay down, and it already sounds a little bit brighter. And then we just mix that in with the original again. So it was 35%. And it just adds a nice little bit of tone in there and gives it a nicer, higher mid-range. Again, as you can see, we're doing distortion and overdrive here as well. And we have a little bit of the chorus. So this is all the same deal, just different settings. I do make these settings for each and every one. I don't copy them over. But some other things like the delay and stuff like that, I tend to copy over a lot because I want my delays to be the same length, and usually they also have the same feedback. That being said though, I do tend to tweak them afterwards if it doesn't fit with a sound, so you always have to check if something fits with a sound. Again, here we're basically doing the same thing for this next one, but we're using a phaser. The reason why I went with the phaser was completely arbitrary. I kind of based it off the fact that we're already using a phaser in this patch. But again, it worked on the sound, so I left it there. And again, as you can see, the same principle, we're distorting it first, in this case. That's because I wanted a little bit more of a balanced spectrum and a little bit more of a glued spectrum before going into that phaser. And then the phaser, again, with no modulation, is just changing the tone of the actual sound that we have, which in this case are these formant sounds. And without it sounds like this. So as you can hear, it's not really noticeable, and it's just a very small detail. But once you start adding these details to all of your tracks and all of your sounds, it can really add up and make your track a lot more interesting than if it were just basic sounds that were used by everyone. It kind of makes a sound your own. Another effect that I've used here is this cabinet, which is something I've never used before, but for this sound it just worked. So this is what that sounds like. Just again adds a little bit of distortion and a little bit of extra gluing to the sound, which makes it really nice. Also together with the chorus. You'll often see that the choruses, I use a lot of choruses now because I really like the sound of it. It kind of smooths out the sound while giving it a tone as well. So it basically does both of the things that I'm trying to do here. And just by having a little bit of that, that can really make it sound very nice. So again, with the enhance here as well, you can see that we're just adding a lot of small effects to it that can really enhance the sound. So that's basically what I wanted to drive home here. The final thing I want to show is this drop arp here, which sits in the other part of the song. We made this on stream, and somebody suggested using a vibrato, which is also similar to what I'm talking about here. So let's listen to this final part here where the vibrato actually comes in. So this is the amount of vibrato that we're using, and I'll show you how you can set that up as well later. So you can hear towards the end here, it kind of gets a little bit more vibrato-y, and the slightly out of pitch feeling of the sound comes from there. So I've just set this up with an LFO at 16th, modulating the fine tuning, and then this macro is the auxiliary for that. And again, this is just to add a slight variation to it and a slight bit of effect that makes it a little bit more interesting. Without it, if we disable this by going here, I think bypass here. If you listen to this, it sounds a lot more standard. And the vibrato kind of adds that little bit of detail to it that makes it sound interesting. Another thing that I wanted to show you here is erosion. In this case, erosion is almost set up as if it were a bit crusher. On the sine wave functionality, it has a bit of a bit crusher effect if you set the frequency fairly high. So that's what we're doing. Erosion, again, is one of those effects that's really useful for adding detail to a song. You can use it in this fashion with a bit crusher. If you set it a lot lower, it will become a lot more aggressive and it will have its own unique character. But you can also add it or use it with white noise or just normal noise to add some high end to that. That's often used in dubstep. Erosion is fairly popular in making dubstep because it can add a very aggressive high end to a sound. Let's quickly demonstrate that here. So if we add erosion afterwards here and set something up like a white noise with fairly high width here towards the high end, you get something like this. And it follows the envelope as well as slightly following the filter of it. So if it's low pass in this case, you can hear we have fewer noise than here up here. So it's a very cool way to add high end to it without just EQing it, as it will still follow the character and the texture and the overall envelope of your sound. So those are some of the microprocesses that I've been doing. And that together with all the normal processing that you see, like the stereo processing, for example, for this sound, really can add character to it and add a little bit more variety to it. So that's what I wanted to talk about for today. It's a little bit of a longer video, and I just kind of wanted to show off some of the settings that I've used and some of the different things and different effects that you can use this for. I encourage you to come up with your own ideas. If you have any ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments for other people to look at. And yeah, kind of share them together and see if you can collaborate into getting a little bit more of a nice sound and a little bit more of a unique character to your sounds. So yeah, with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like. That really helps the channel. If you're new here and you're watching me for the first time, feel free to subscribe. But that's going to be it for today. So thanks for watching, and bye bye.